Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone. Thank you.
We're excited to be here. Glad to share a little bit of our perspective on the world and also learn from you guys. So, we wanted this to be a bit more interactive than just talking at you. Uh,
Hi.
Hello! I
Thanks for
know
coming
you.
by.
Perfect. Exactly what we needed. Thank you. Ultimately, this chat is meant to be, tech forward, but we want to hear what your questions are and how we're going to roll with it. So, Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about where you come from in the world?
Sure. So my name's Tim Porter. I'm the CTO at ModTech Labs, and my background, I spent most of my career in video games as a technical artist. I specialized in device-specific optimization, interdepartment liaison work, and a considerable amount of automated pipelines, which led me into my career in film. I worked on pipelines, so I was a pipeline TD. Last film I worked on was Alice in Wonderland Through the Looking Glass at SBI. And then I worked at places like Two-Bit Circus afterwards, doing experiential experiences. And then had my own studio doing XR, AR, and VR for major corporations, Microsoft, Intel, KPMG, fun things like that in between. So I'm going to come on the side of a developer and how developers can go ahead and make these tools really amazing, and how we can integrate those into processes and pipelines and still keep the artist-centric focus, or as Unity has called it. What was the nickname they have for it?
Assisted artistry.
Assisted artistry. We don't want to replace artists. We want to make them supercharged. So that's me.
I am Alex Porter. I'm CEO at ModTech Labs. Mod is focused on content optimization and quality assurance of content. Right now, our tools are primarily geared at virtual production. That being said, that's the tip of the iceberg. We know that content is not only across industries, right? It's across applications, it's across devices, and ultimately, all of these things need scale. We right now have a bit of a deficit in the amount of people that can actually serve the content needs of all of these industries. And so using tools like AI to adapt and increase the efficiency of these folks can actually help us move this needle further. So we're going to talk a bit about all of these fun acronyms. Who doesn't love acronyms? Alphabet soup, anyone?
Maybe I did it backwards. Up. Nope. Down. Oh, we went all the way back.
Ooh.
A little slower this time for me.
All right. So what we did is we decided to put some questions up to figure out where the audience is and how we can be effective in sharing our insight in the world. Does anybody have any that are jumping out at them? Anything? We can just start from the top. You tell us. All right, Tim.
If not, then we'll just go straight from the top, and we'll do what are the advantages of using NeRFs and GANs in production. So how many people are familiar with GANs? General Adversarial Networks?
All right,
Things
we got
like
a couple.
We got a couple. How about NeRFs?
All
Who
right,
has
we got a
made
couple
a
more.
NeRF?
Yeah,
Cool.
okay.
Who has had problems with the NeRF and then trying to integrate it? Everybody.
Yeah.
So NeRFs are great. They're really wonderful. It's like photogrammetry on steroids. The problem is it doesn't necessarily live in the same world that photogrammetry lives in. Everybody knows when you start working in game engines or DCCs, we work in a polygonal format. So we have polygons and squares, and all of that ends up working together. The problem with NeRFs is that they don't always live in that format. You can convert them over, and there's some certain amazing things that we can do. But the negative is, how do you deal with them? Some of the really cool advantages, and we've done, and we'll have a story that'll be coming out shortly afterwards. We actually partnered with the University of Buffalo. So we're from New York, Buffalo, New York. And we brought in a specialist in NeRFs. And how can we start dealing with some of the deficiencies of NeRFs, like the fact that they don't live in a polygonal format? And so we end up creating a system that continues to call the NeRF and updates it inside of the three-dimensional space. So you can do fun polygonal things with it. You can end up creating a cage mesh that allows you to go ahead and interact with it. And the big positive with this is that you can end up doing, for us, we do a lot of work in virtual production. That means that you can do backgrounds, you can do midgrounds, you can do plates very, very quickly. And you don't have to worry about things like who's done photogrammetry? shine, sheen, reflective, refractive, thin surfaces, stuff with moire patterns, you name it. That makes it very confused. NeRFs don't necessarily have those same issues, and you can actually train those out. So it allowed us to be able to go ahead and do that. And then on the other side of things like adversarial networks. Who here has made a normal map? Specularity map, all of the other secondary maps. So as we're moving towards real-time production, those hands are going to continue going up, and there are going to be more people that'll be working on that. Being able to use a GAN to go ahead and create your secondary maps is extremely important and solves a lot of problems that the industry is currently trying to face with brute force and with manpower.
The reality is that, the production industry is an industry going from 60 frames a month to 60 frames a second. And real-time content creation is a different beast. So coming up with tools, finding ways to sort of enhance and create opportunities for teams to be more efficient is a really important piece of the industry right now. We're at a turning point where we need to start seeing these things turn on. And we're seeing a ton of releases, broadly from all of the named companies here that everyone is familiar with for a ton of opportunity that will massively impact the industry in creating everything from hair to volumetric effects to optimization, right? And the goal is to enable artists to be more creative. Creativity is not mesh decimation. It's it's not UV wrapping. It's not the things that are the grindy, slow, redundant bits of the pipeline. And so these tools are ones that we can start using to help affect that in a positive manner.
Cool. You want to move on to the next question?
Yes, we're going to move to the next question, unless we have anybody who has questions about this.
Do we have questions in the
Anybody?
audience? No?
No questions? All right.
So, how advanced AI techniques transform the production process? So, what can we do in the world of machine learning that have changed things? We're starting to watch a number of DCCs and content generation tools just in general starting to work in AI machine learning tools. The advancements that you've seen Adobe do at this point where we have autofill is super important for the industry. The other parts, and if anybody's never made a tileable texture, it's a headache. It takes hours to actually make something that automatically tiles. The advancements that we've seen, once again, from Adobe has really kind of helped out those solutions. Some of the other places that we're exploring and that we are actually putting into our production is how do you deal with optimization early in the process? If you're doing real-time production, does anybody here do real-time production for virtual production and stuff? Okay, we got a couple. Some of the issues that end up coming, as we've talked about, the industry is going from a pre-rendered solution to a now solution. If I'm not running at 24 frames a second in front of my actors, it doesn't go well. It's a very difficult experience. We've heard about some major movies that have come out from possibly someone's last name, Cameron-ish, about 3 frames per second. It's a very difficult problem to deal with. And so how do you optimize those assets so that you can hit the frame rate? And the only solutions on that are to be able to understand where you're going to end up playing those assets back later on. And so using machine learning algorithms, you can actually go ahead and test the difference between the systems that you're currently using, the expectations in the future, and then what you'll end up playing back on shoot day. And adding in those loads without actually having to put your assets on those screens is a huge win. So think about being able to go ahead and optimize on a screen that you've never even actually tested the real assets on, but you have a machine learning algorithm that actually sits there and says, this is the probable frame rate, this is the probable highest quality, and this is the amount that you should actually optimize those assets. And that's a really important kind of focus and use case. Once again, not removing the artist. How do we make sure that they are confident on shoot day that the assets they're going to do are going to be amazing?
So the piece I'll add to this is the efficiency side, right? So machine learning is also great for creating efficiency in processing itself, right? You can train algorithms to effectively output for different types of mediums, right? We're talking everything from virtual production screens to augmented reality to 3D printing, right? And we're seeing more and more of these use cases sort of combining. Someone wants, sort of this master asset, and then to be able to take that asset and optimize it in any level for any type of output. What you really need to have an understanding of is how to process faster. And so for us, we've focused a ton on creating the opportunity to learn from the assets that we're processing and actually create distributed processing and make it more efficient and effective across all the nodes that it's going on. So you're going away from that linear processing sort of standard that's been in the industry for a long time and creating a much more effective and efficient workflow.
Yeah, often we end up hearing from creators that they'll end up doing what's called transmedia. So they'll end up getting, oh, we're going to do a live event. Then you get the movie asset. Then they got to optimize. And they're like, hey, we want to do some 3D printing. Okay, cool. Now we want to go ahead and make a toy. And then they end up having to do 17, 18 different versions. And by the end of it, most of their time has been spent on optimizing that asset. If the efficiency nodes and all of the systems were set up in beforehand, then it's not something that's necessarily as much of an issue. So move on to the next one. All right, giving examples of successful NeRFs and GANs. It doesn't necessarily have to be NeRFs and GANs. We can open it up to artificial intelligence or machine learning just in general. So one of the things that we did talk about initially was how do you deal with things like secondary maps? Secondary maps are a really good place for GANs. Being able to have a very large, diverse data set where you have something like a diffuse map, and then converting it over to an albedo, and then from an albedo over to a whole bunch of other different ones if you need specularity, everything like that. Obviously, it's not a full BRDF. There are some solutions out there if you guys are looking for something like that. They have single image BRDF solutions that are out there that you guys can take a look at, but it's a really easy win for a GAN to go ahead and go into. Another thing that we talked about is things like perceptual optimization or perceptual quality control. Being able to understand that the place that you're going to play your asset back is not going to be the same place that you are currently looking at. Many of us have, 24 to 32 inch screens. Is that where the asset is going to be initially or eventually? If you're doing mobile development, no, it's going to be a much tinier screen. How do you know that you haven't gone too small to where your pixel pitch is too small? Well,
Plus,
an
we
AI
all
system
know
can help.
responsive design it's
Yeah.
a feat in and of itself.
It is. Responsive design is extremely important. Did you want to cover some of that? No.
I was just adding it. Keep going.
I can keep going. I can keep going. And then, of course, the same thing with like polygonal assets. How do you know if maybe you go to a big screen? Like we said, we do a lot of VP work. If it's on my 17-inch screen or my laptop, how do I know it's actually going to look good up there? That's where neural networks are extremely helpful and make sure that as you go ahead and you do your optimization, you know exactly where the quality and all of those things go in. So, I mean, those are really easy kind of wins. Doing things like NeRFs, like we talked about backplates, those are great. Mid-ground assets, things like that. Being able to fill in those holes and those gaps for, secondary generated assets to where, this isn't a hero asset. Why spend the energy of an artist on it? Go ahead and focus forward in that direction. I think it's a wonderful and easy use case for everybody who wants to get involved.
Yeah, we've also seen a ton of examples while we're here at Siggraph about using it for pre-pro, right? The reality is, the quicker, easier, even, the messy version is good for something. Helping to do that visualization, especially on the creative side, it's really important for the director, to be able to visualize how these things interact on set. It's really important for the actors to be immersed in a world. And the more that we can do that with these, quick, easy assets, whether it's a background, whether it's a character, what have you, that's really important for that presence and for the end, result.
Yeah, actually, we have a series that'll be coming out if you watch what we're doing, where we have an intern that came from SCAD, and within a month, he created a 30-second sequence using AI in as many places as he could. Considerable amount of things like stable diffusion in the beginning for his pre-production. End up using an animated version of stable. I don't think it was stable diffusion. I don't remember exactly which one he used to go ahead and get his storyboards and his animated timing out of the way, and then continued down with things like secondary maps, automated texture generation, as much as he could to put that on him so that he could go ahead and supercharge himself and be a one-man production, and which is great for smaller productions, and then that supercharges even larger productions as well. So it was pretty good if you guys want to see that. That'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks. You want to take this one?
So industries that can benefit the most from these technologies, I mean, we've talked about several of them already, but of course, what's really happening in the underbelly of real time is that it's across industries, right? I don't know how many of you have had the chance to like network around the conference, but we've already talked to people that are here from car manufacturers, people that are here from geospatial, from government, from production, from XR, like you name it. We're seeing this infusion of magic across industries right now because all of the people are dealing with the same problems and the same opportunities that real time is affording us. We can actually take this content, get it into place, and deploy it across any device much more effectively. But we go back to, the opportunity to help build everyone up because there is a lack of talent to cover all of these bases. And ultimately, there are a lot of industries coming to real time that don't necessarily understand all of the bits and pieces that they need to put in place to clearly deploy these tools and strategies, right? I see you laughing because
Understatement of the
yeah.
year. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's our job, the reason that we're here primarily is education, right? I think we're all here to learn something from our peers. I think we're all here to share something that we know. And I think it's a really important thing for us to continue these conversations and talk about the use cases and talk about the industry applications because we don't know what we don't know. And it's really important to have that cross pollination because I guarantee that someone else has probably already solved most of the problems that you have in some other industry niche somewhere that you haven't talked to. And so I think that things like this bring us together and create that opportunity.
And that's interesting. That was something I bring up a lot. So I've been in games and movies for, my entire career. And a lot of the solutions that I'm starting to see that are coming up are much more polished versions of what we did 20 plus years ago in the game industry. When we're talking about real-time production, I mean, that is our baby. That game engines and all of those things were stuff that obviously they came from other places, but we matured them as far as an M&E kind of space. And so many of the times when I see things on how do you deal with user interaction, how do you deal with quality control, how do you deal with integration of assets, those are things that we've had in the game industry for a considerable amount of time. So looking back, I think it's a very important thing just to look at old white papers, look at old projects and old things that have been out, because it kind of helps because everything's old is new again. We kind of do the same thing. And if you're around long enough, it always helps. Bell bottoms. I haven't worn them, but I saw Jinkos yesterday. And I remember that. Yeah. Super fun.
The cost and speed of production and how AI is affecting this. We've talked to this to some extent, but generally speaking, automation in and of itself can actually increase efficiency by upwards of 40%. You throw in some AI to take processes that are, days to weeks of work, you can go backwards and you can save yourself literally multitudes of time, right? So I'm trying to think of one of the examples. It's not the mesh decimation, it's the other one in
A
our
remeshing system.
it's the remeshing system. Is that the one that I'm like, you tell the spec?
So,
'Cause I'm blanking.
So things like automated systems, you're talking about decimation. Typically, if you have an artist that sits there and does decimation, it can end up taking, especially for like a hero asset, upwards of a week to go ahead and recreate, keep the quality, maintain, as you're talking about for other specs. So if you're going from a movie asset to something that would be inside of a game, we've seen, obviously full rebuilds. I remember doing a project with the Ecto One where, we have everything from the bolt all the way down, which was great when we were trying to do some filming work. But when you're talking about doing an XR project, and especially specifically a VR project, that is a considerable amount of time. But most of it really kind of comes down into setting it into an automated system that ends up handling that. So you're talking about going from, what was a week for the entire thing down to hours. And that's such an amazing and powerful thing. It allows for iterative processes, and I think it becomes much more artistic focused. How do you let artists really do things? And that's not by making them sit there and wait for hours and days for their stuff to come back. It's by making sure that the tools are not only fast, they're easy to use. And so a lot of the techniques that we're seeing are really taking that stopgap between what was something that you would do in an automated process and then required human interaction, stuff like perceptual optimization. How do you make sure that it actually looks good at all times? And the only way that you can really do that is either with a human eye or by using an algorithm of some sort that can actually tell the difference between what looks good and what doesn't look good based on what has been told and what's been taught. And so we're seeing a lot of production that has been sped up in the QC world and QA.
I mean, I think there's also the opportunity to have these algorithms output a multitude of variations, right? And then you can have a human go in and choose the right variation. And then you can match that, whatever color, scene, spec, whatever the variation is that you're trying to match. And then you've created an opportunity for efficiency and for creativity. And in general, I think that these things should never be locked anyway. They should create the opportunity and the sort of palette, right? AI is the paintbrush, is what I heard earlier, and I was like, I love that actually, the paintbrush, not the artist. So it's a function of the creator. And the creator needs to be able to have those outputs to choose from. The creator needs to be able to have the flexibility to tweak the outputs. And so in our, sort of opinion and our view on the world, it really is a function of being able to empower the artist to do what they do best, do that creative bit and not have to do the repetitive, boring, redundant, technical things that are required. 7 minutes? All right.
We have 7 minutes. It's wonderful. What are the potential risks or downside of using these techniques? Obviously, with any tool, things can be abused. Things can be taken all the way to the other end. It could be utilized in the wrong hands to replace people. But I don't believe at this point in time that we're currently sitting in that it's going to replace anybody who's not doing something that is massively manual and repetitive. And those are the jobs that artists never really want to get into, but end up becoming forced into. Think of your person who's like, oh, I'm really good at optimization. Yeah, I mean, they're good at it and they are efficient at doing it, but is that something that fills their heart and soul and that they were expecting when they started the industry? No. So I think in and of itself, the bigger worries that we really should go towards are things more like deep faking. I've seen a couple of ones where it's like Obama who's talking, and I was like, if I wasn't much more sophisticated on noticing what I'm looking at, I'd be like, he said some really naughty things. Those are dangerous. And things like that are dangerous just in general. And of course, any technology can go down that way. But there and several other manufacturers are actually working on solutions to ensure that things like deepfake aren't as easy to fool humans and have checks and balances and things like that are in there. So that's important. And that's my two on that one.
The piece that I'll add to that is, we ourselves got involved with CTA about 5 years ago, which is the Consumer Technology Association. They're the people that run CES. It's their, trade association side to focus on helping create standards, right? They're a standards organization. We all love standards, right?
I actually do like doing standards.
Standards are helpful, but the process of creating standards is a little painful sometimes, is what I'll say. But they're really important, right? We need to all sort of come to the table and have a consensus on how we're going to deploy these tools. Whether or not we participate, they will be regulated. There will be rails that are put on. There will be things. And so, our goal was to, be involved with someone who was helping speak on behalf of technologists and sort of the better view of how these things could be applied. That being said, Tim contributed as the chair of the AI group to a standards ethics and AI standard that was published that's available on their website for free. And I think that, us looking at what's already been published and also paying attention to the things that are happening around us right now with standardization, USD, for instance, different side of the world, but important to pay attention to what's being standardized and how we can contribute our voices to what that looks like, because we, as a smaller company, as a startup, right, we wanted to make sure that our voices were heard as well. So I do implore you to get involved in those things if you can.
Agreed. And last one, discuss the accessibilities of these techniques to smaller companies. So actually, this is the accessibility to get into it, if you have a technical mindset, isn't super hard. The harder part is how you implement the amount of time in the user interface / user experience. So making and taking these tools that most of them are basically science fair projects, and then converting them into something that are extremely useful for artists, it can be a huge lift. Now, there are some people that are doing some heavy solutions around this, including there's a web version of Stable Diffusion where it's a web page. Like if it's set up, it's like phenomenal. And then you can literally just click and type in your prompt and you get everything back that you need from it. But some of the other parts can be quite difficult. Because they are in a science fairy like project situation, being able to get them to work on your infrastructure can be a considerable amount of work. So it really kind of depends on your team, and what your team is interested in, where their focus is. But if you put the energy in, it's kind of a rinse and repeat. Once you've kind of put that initial kind of hump and you're over this heavy kind of jump towards being able to work this into your company, the solutions and the answers that you get out of it become a much easier problem as you continue moving forward. So,
The only thing I'll add to that is that I've seen at this conference a lot of focus being around this, assisted artistry. And that includes, these large companies that have a lot of resources deploying things that are meant for consumer use, if you will. And in that case, I think that can most of the time directly translate to some use case experimentation, functionality, experimentation within smaller companies. And I think, you got to dip your toe in, get your feet wet, and understand how you can apply those things.
Great.
I believe we're out of time.
They're pulling the plug.
Anybody have any questions?
She's got a hook.
Questions?
It's good.
No questions.
Oh,
fantastic. Even better. We told you everything.
We told
you ever wanted to know.
all the good stuff.
Exactly.
I was going to hand the mic out if anybody had a question. Nope, no questions? All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.